It starts the way most things do in Black childhood, quietly, in between the lines. Not with a headline, not with a crisis, but with a look, a tone, a responsibility slipped into small hands that were meant to be playing, not holding the world together. You're 8, maybe 9, standing in a kitchen that suddenly feels older than you. There are bills on the table. There is tension in the air. There is a parent whose eyes are tired in a way you don't yet have words for. Someone jokes that you are so mature for your age. Someone says, "You're the little man of the house now." Someone calls you strong black girl, strong black boy, like it's a blessing, not a burden. And quietly, without meaning to, you start to understand that childhood is not something you get to live in fully. It's something you visit in between moments of caretaking, translation, protection, in a world that already sees Black children as older, louder, tougher than they are. Growing up too fast isn't a choice, it's an expectation. And somewhere deep inside your small body, a truth begins to settle. If I don't hold it together, everything might fall apart. It never happens all at once. A Black child doesn't wake up one morning and decides to grow up. The world makes that decision for them. Sometimes it starts at home. A parent tired from work, drained by a world that treats them like they're built for endurance, not softness, lets out a sigh heavier than their body, and the child feels it. They always feel it. They bring the parent a blanket. They quiet their own needs. They learn what tone means before they learn what the words mean. This is how caregiving begins, silently, instinctively. Other times it starts outside, in school hallways where teachers mistake anxiety for attitude, where innocence is questioned faster, where a Black child is told to be careful, be good, don't play too rough, as if childhood itself is dangerous when it lives in their skin. And so they adjust. Their laughter softens. Their curiosity folds in on itself. They scan for reactions before speaking. They read fear, discomfort, and expectations in the faces around them and calibrate themselves to create ease. This is the disappearance, not a vanishing of presence, but a shrinking of self, a child becoming what the room needs, not what their heart feels. Something ancient clicks in the mind. If I am perfect, maybe I'll be safe. If I am useful, maybe I won't become a burden. If I am invisible, maybe the world will leave me alone. In that moment, childhood begins to loosen its grip. Not because the child is ready to let go, but because the world has already placed too much weight on their small shoulders. There is a word for what happens when a child steps into roles that were never meant for them. A word for the moment innocence is replaced with responsibility, caution, and emotional labor. Psychologists call it parentification or embeds, but for a Black child, it often expands into something wider, heavier, older. It's not just taking care of parents. It's taking care of the room, taking care of other people's comfort, taking care of themselves in environments where they are not granted the grace of childhood. Another layer appears, hypervigilance. The nervous system learning to stay alert, not out of fear of monsters under the bed, but because the real world has already shown its teeth, and beneath it all lives a centuries-old concept, adultification bias. The world sees Black children as older than they are, less innocent, less in need of protection. Their mistakes are judged more harshly. Their emotions are policed more severely. Their cry for help is interpreted as defiance. So the child adapts, not because they choose to, but because the world chooses for them. The wound, then, is not just parentification. It is an entire psychological framework that tells the child, you are responsible for your safety. You are responsible for others' comfort. You do not get to be fragile. You do not get to be young. This isn't just sadness. This isn't just stress. This is a pattern, one woven so deeply into their development that they begin to mistake it for personality. What they call maturity is often a mask. What they call strength is often survival. There comes a point when the child stops reacting to the world and starts reorganizing themselves around it. Not consciously, not deliberately, but quietly, the way a tree bends toward light without ever deciding to. The black child who grew up too fast learns early that safety is not guaranteed, so their body becomes the first to adapt. Their shoulders tense, their voice softens, their eyes scan before their feet step. The nervous system becomes a watchtower, always ready, always listening for shifts in tone, in mood, in threat. Their identity forms around responsibility, around caregiving, around being the strong one, because that is the role everyone seems to expect of them: family, teachers, society, even strangers with unspoken assumptions. Soon they stop asking, "Who am I?" and instead start asking, "Who do I need to be to keep the peace?" Piece by piece, the self becomes edited. They hide anger because anger is dangerous. They hide sadness because sadness inconveniences others. They hide confusion because black children are supposed to know better. They hide softness because the world has already mistaken them for adults. This is how self-erasure begins. Small, quiet, almost graceful. They become the reliable one, the steady one, the achiever, the protector. The one who never breaks, and people praise them for it. They applaud the discipline, the maturity, the resilience. But beneath that praise lies exhaustion, a deep, bone-heavy fatigue that grows from never being able to rest inside their own childhood. Relationships start forming around imbalance. Friends come to them for emotional labor, teachers expect them to lead, family expects them to hold things together. They rarely receive care, they rarely experience being nurtured, they rarely hear, "You're allowed to be tired." Over time, the child internalizes a painful belief. My worth comes from what I carry, not from who I am. This belief follows them everywhere, into classrooms where they overperform, into friendships where they overgive, into silence where their needs go unmet, into adulthood where vulnerability feels foreign and frightening. Their nervous system knows how to survive, but it has forgotten how to simply exist. And inside them, hidden under layers of composure, lives a small voice, a younger self whispering the question they were never allowed to ask. When is it my turn to be held? Hidden beneath the strength they learned to wear like armor is a grief so quiet it rarely has language. A grief that didn't come all at once but accumulated, moment by moment, year by year, in every instance where they had to grow instead of rest, protect instead of play, understand instead of be understood. This grief lives in the child who never got to crumble, who never had the luxury of innocence, who felt the weight of expectation long before they felt the freedom of choice. It appears in the questions they were too afraid to ask. Why didn't anyone notice I was overwhelmed? Why did no one ask if I was scared? Why did I have to be strong for people who were supposed to be strong for me? It appears in the memories that resurface unexpectedly. The night they comforted an adult who should have comforted them. The moment they realized their pain was invisible. The day they learned that softness could be dangerous because the world read their tears as defiance. It appears in the resentment they never voiced, not because they were ungrateful, but because they were too loyal, too understanding, too used to carrying burdens that weren't theirs. And it appears in the exhaustion, not physical, but emotional, spiritual, the exhaustion of a child who lived decades before their time. This grief is not loud. It does not scream. It does not demand. It sits in the chest like a quiet ache, like something unfinished, like someone forgotten. And the hardest truth is this: no one saw it. Not because it wasn't there, but because the child learned to hide it so well that even they forgot it existed. But grief has a way of waiting. It waits for stillness. It waits for adulthood. It waits for the moment the soul finally whispers, "I shouldn't have had to carry that." The psychology behind growing up too fast is not abstract. It leaves measurable fingerprints on the mind, the nervous system, the body. When a child is placed in roles meant for adults, their brain reorganizes itself for survival, not metaphorically, biologically. The nervous system becomes the first responder. Children who must stay alert for emotional shifts at home develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, a constant scanning of the environment, an inability to fully relax, a body that treats normal life as if danger might be hiding inside it. Over time, this becomes a baseline, a default setting, a survival mode that never learned how to turn off. The attachment system adapts too. A child who has to earn safety learns that love is conditional. That affection must be managed. That their worth depends on how well they perform stability for the adults around them. This can lead to anxious attachment, or paradoxically, avoidant attachment. The instinct to rely only on themselves because leaning on anyone else once led to disappointment. There is also the phenomenon of role reversal, a form of parentification where the child becomes the emotional anchor of the home. This distorts identity. It teaches the child to value themselves only by how useful they are to others. Neuroscience shows that chronic childhood stress can alter the development of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulation, trust, and a sense of internal safety. This is why in adulthood, they may feel anxious in calm rooms, unsettled by praise, or suspicious of softness, not because something is wrong with them, but because their brain learned to survive before it ever had the chance to simply grow. By the time that child becomes an adult, their survival patterns feel like personality, like identity, like truth. But they are echoes, old strategies dressed as traits, carried long after the danger has passed. One of the first patterns is hyper-independence. The adult who grew up too fast trusts themselves more than they trust anyone else. They call it being strong, being capable, being low maintenance. But beneath that strength is a child who learned that needing others was unsafe, that leaning meant risking disappointment. Another pattern is overfunctioning, doing too much in relationships, taking responsibility for everyone's emotional temperature, trying to fix problems they did not create. They don't do this to control. They do it because, as children, peace depended on their ability to keep things together. In friendships, they become the listener, the therapist, the reliable one. People come to them with heavy stories and they hold them gently, skillfully, but rarely offer their own. Vulnerability feels like handing someone a weapon. In love, the patterns deepen. They struggle to rest into trust, struggle to believe they won't be abandoned, struggle to let someone meet needs they spent a lifetime suppressing. Softness feels dangerous. Dependence feels like walking into a room without armor. They may find themselves drawn to partners who mirror the chaos of their childhood, not because they like it, but because familiarity feels like safety to a nervous system shaped by survival. Another pattern is achievement as identity. They work hard, excel, overperform, but not for ambition, for worthiness. As children, they were praised for being responsible. As adults, they chase accomplishment to recreate that fleeting feeling of being good. And then there is emotional numbness, the inability to fully experience joy because the nervous system doesn't trust it. Joy feels temporary, conditional, like something that might be taken away. None of these patterns are flaws. They are remnants. Footprints of a childhood spent surviving, echoes of a child who learned to adapt long before they understood the cost. There comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when the adult who grew up too fast finally sees the pattern for what it is. Maybe it happens during a quiet evening when they realize they can care for everyone but themselves. Maybe it happens in therapy when a single question lands too close to the truth. Maybe it happens in a relationship when someone tries to love them gently and they don't know how to let it in. The moment is rarely loud, rarely dramatic. It feels more like a soft click inside the chest, a recognition, a truth returning home. The realization sounds like this. This isn't my personality. This is my survival pattern. For the first time, the armor feels heavy, the independence feels lonely, the constant vigilance feels exhausting, and the achievements, the ones they once clung to for identity, feel strangely hollow. They begin to notice how often they apologize for simply having needs, how often they shrink to avoid burdening others, how often they mistake fear for instinct or abandonment anxiety for intuition. They also notice the child within, the one who never had permission to rest, to cry, to be held, to be small. Recognition doesn't immediately heal them, but it opens a door where they can finally name what they've been carrying, the responsibility that wasn't theirs, the fear that wasn't theirs, the silence that wasn't theirs. And once the truth has been named, once the pattern has been seen, it can no longer operate in the dark. This moment, this quiet internal shift, is the beginning of change. Not healing yet, just awareness. But awareness is the first breath after years of holding it in. This is the part where something tender begins, where the shame that lived in the shadows finally meets the light. Because once they recognize the pattern, the next realization comes quietly, but with the force of truth. I wasn't weak. I was adapting. The adult who grew up too fast starts to understand something they were never told as a child. Everything they did to survive was intelligence, not failure. Instinct, not flaw. The silence they kept was protection. The strength they performed was armor. The caretaking they offered was love in its most desperate form. They did not choose these roles. They inherited them. This reframing softens the hard edges inside. It allows them to look at their younger self with compassion instead of criticism. They begin to see the child who tried so hard to keep peace, to prevent chaos, to earn safety in a world that didn't give it freely. And slowly, a new truth forms. I wasn't responsible for what happened. I was just a child. This truth removes the blame they've carried for years. Blame for not being perfect. Blame for not fixing a broken home. Blame for the emotions of adults who should have protected them. Compassion becomes a form of release, a soft letting go of expectations they were never meant to meet. It doesn't rewrite the past, but it changes the relationship to it. The burden lightens, the pressure loosens, and in its place grows forgiveness, not for others, but for themselves. This is not healing yet, but it is the first moment they can finally breathe without apologizing for it. Healing doesn't arrive with certainty. It arrives the way morning light enters a dark room, slowly, softly, touching only what it can reach. For the adult who grew up too fast, healing begins the moment they stop trying to fix themselves and start trying to hear themselves. Not with judgment. Not with urgency, just presence. It begins when they pause long enough to notice the exhaustion they once dismissed. When they recognize that their restlessness is not ambition, but a nervous system still bracing for impact. It begins when they allow sadness to surface without rushing to be strong, and when they let joy linger without waiting for it to be taken away. Healing looks like small things, saying I'm tired instead of pushing through, saying I need help, even when it feels unfamiliar, letting someone's kindness land without questioning the motive behind it. It looks like unlearning urgency, unlearning perfection, unlearning the belief that love must be earned. Sometimes healing comes through community, through finding others who grew up too fast, others who understand the quiet ache without needing explanation. In their presence, the mask feels unnecessary. Their softness feels safe. Other times, healing comes through solitude, through sitting with the younger self they once abandoned for survival, through whispering the words they desperately needed back then. You're safe now. You don't have to hold everything together anymore. Healing isn't linear. Some days feel heavier than the ones before. Triggers appear unexpectedly. Old fears resurface. Old instincts return. But the difference is this. They now recognize these as echoes, not truths. And with each small act of gentleness, each moment of rest, each boundary honored, a new version of self quietly takes form. Not the child who survived, but the adult who can finally live. In the end, nothing dramatic marks the shift. No miracle, no grand declaration. Just a quiet softening, the kind that happens when a life built on survival finally makes room for breath. The child who grew up too fast still lives inside them, small and watchful, holding memories that were too heavy at the time. But now that child is no longer carrying the weight alone. They are held gently, patiently, by the adult who has learned to stay. Some days the past returns like a familiar ache. Some days the old armor feels tempting to wear again. But these moments no longer define them. They pass through, like clouds drifting across a steady sky. They begin to see themselves clearly, not as the caretaker, not as the strong one, not as the survivor, but as a whole human being worthy of ease, joy, softness, and belonging. And slowly, their life becomes spacious, kind, real. The story doesn't end in triumph. It ends in tenderness and in the simple knowing that they are becoming whole, not by erasing the child they were, but by finally bringing them home,